Admiral Kethvar's four eyes tracked the holographic display with growing unease. The Confederation's 7th Fleet stretched across the void in perfect formation, massive Altarian dreadnoughts bristling with plasma cannons, sleek Forthon destroyers crackling with energy shields, and towering Zephyrian carriers disgorging swarms of fighters. At the center of this armada hung the command ship Eternal Dominion, a kilometer-long monument to alien engineering. And tucked between two escort frigates barely visible against the cosmic backdrop sat the Terra's Fury, a human vessel no larger than a Confederation maintenance pod. Admiral, his tactical officer chittered, mandibles clicking nervously. The human ship requests permission to engage the enemy vanguard. Kethvar's head tendrils twitched in what passed for amusement among his species. The humans had been part of the Confederation for barely 3 cycles, their primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons laughably outdated compared to the energy-based technologies of the elder races. Their ships were cramped, inefficient, and built with materials that other species had abandoned millennia ago. Denied, Kethvar rumbled. The Terra's Fury will maintain formation and provide moral support. On the far edge of the system, the Void Collective's Black Fleet began its advance. Ships that seemed to absorb light itself moved with terrible purpose, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with malevolent energy. For 2 years, the Collective had swept through Confederation space, their adaptive technology learning and countering every weapon, every strategy, every desperate gambit the Allied forces could devise. The first engagement began predictably. Altarian plasma met Collective void lances in brilliant explosions that painted space in impossible colors. Vorthon destroyers danced through the darkness, their shield matrices flickering under the assault of biomissiles that seemed to think and adapt with each impact. The battle raged for hours, and slowly, inevitably, the Confederation line began to buckle. Admiral, the tactical officer's voice cracked with panic. The Collective ships are adapting faster than projected. Our plasma yields are down 30%, and their hulls are developing resistance to... I see it. Kethvar cut him off, watching as another Altarian dreadnought's fire became increasingly ineffective against the enemy's evolving defenses. This was how every battle ended. The Collective learned, adapted, and consumed. A new voice crackled over the comm. Confederation Command, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terra's Fury. Request permission to implement Protocol Omega. Kethvar's head tendrils went rigid. Protocol Omega was theoretical, a desperate last resort that no sane commander would authorize. Captain Chen, Protocol Omega is forbidden. The risks... With respect, Admiral. Chen's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. The risks of losing this system are greater. The Collective has never encountered human warfare doctrine. That's our advantage. Your ship is barely armed. How can... Admiral, Chen interrupted. We've been studying your battles for 2 years. You fight like civilized beings. The Collective expects energy weapons, they expect shields, they expect rational tactics. A pause, and when she spoke again, there was something predatory in her voice. They don't expect humans. Before Kethvar could respond, the Terra's Fury broke formation. The tiny ship accelerated past the Confederation line, its primitive fusion drive burning like a star. But something was wrong. The ship wasn't following any known attack vector. Instead, it dove toward the system's asteroid belt, weaving between floating rocks with impossible precision. What is she doing? Kethvar's tactical officer whispered. They found out 30 seconds later. The Terra's Fury emerged from the asteroid field like a meteor, its hull studded with magnetic clamps holding dozens of kilometer-wide asteroids. The ship had turned itself into a kinetic artillery platform, using the system's own debris as ammunition. The first asteroid struck a Collective dreadnought at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact vaporized both the rock and a quarter of the enemy ship's hull. But that was just the beginning. Captain Chen's voice echoed across all frequencies. All Confederation vessels implement human combat doctrine immediately. Target their adapted defenses with everything they can't adapt to. What followed broke every rule of civilized warfare. Altarian ships began ramming enemy vessels. their captains finally understanding that sometimes the simplest solution was the most effective. Forthon destroyers started using their shield generators as weapons, creating gravitic anomalies that tore through biomechanical hulls. Zephyrian fighters abandoned their energy weapons entirely, instead loading their bays with chunks of metal and debris. But the Terra's fury was just getting started. The human ship dove into the enemy formation, too small and fast for the collective's weapons to track effectively. It released clouds of metallic chaff that confused enemy sensors, deployed primitive chemical explosives that created electromagnetic pulses, and used its own fusion drive as a weapon, burning enemy ships with raw nuclear fire. Impossible, Kethvar breathed, watching as collective ships, vessels that had adapted to every known weapon, began to falter against attacks they had never encountered. How do you adapt to a chunk of iron moving at relativistic speeds? How do you evolve defenses against an enemy willing to turn their own ship into a guided missile? The turning point came when the Terra's fury did something no rational being would attempt. Captain Chen aimed her ship directly at the collective's command vessel and engaged her fusion drive at maximum output. But instead of ramming the enemy ship, she used her drive's exhaust to carve through its hull like a plasma torch, cutting the massive vessel in half while somehow avoiding destruction herself. The collective fleet, suddenly leaderless and facing tactics their biomechanical minds couldn't comprehend, began to retreat. As the enemy ships fled into hyperspace, Admiral Kethvar opened a channel to the Terra's fury. "Captain Chen," he said slowly, "that was the most reckless, illogical, and effective combat performance I have ever witnessed." Chen's laughter crackled through the comm. "Admiral, you've been fighting this war like gentlemen. Sometimes you need barbarians." Kethvar looked at the tactical display, where the smallest ship in his fleet hung battered but victorious among the debris of their enemies. For the first time in 2 years, the Confederation had won a decisive victory, and they had learned something important. Sometimes the most primitive weapons were the most effective because they were the ones nobody expected. The humans, it seemed, were very good at being unexpected.